We have a special guest this morning, Jon Comstock, who is a Democratic candidate for House District 96. Jon, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. I'm excited by all the voter turnout that's happening with early voting.
Lots of votes.
I think I saw, in fact, I did see a number yesterday from a presentation that I attended that said right now, and this may be a day old now, but 58% of the folks, of the total vote in 2016 has already voted.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Jon, now early voting started back on the 19th, and as you indicate, about 58% of the total in 2016 has voted, and 61% over 50.
Over the age of 50, yes. So that tells us, and it's kind of what we would expect.
Right.
The more seasoned voters are the ones that take advantage of the early voting more often than not. The first-time voters or the not-so-frequent voters, they tend to wait and vote on Election Day.
Do we still have time to get absentee ballots?
You do have time, but today is October
27th.
What is it now? Is it the 26th?
27th.
27th.
Yep. So it's getting thin, isn't it?
It is getting thin. I'm thinking to myself that technically the last day you can turn in an absentee ballot, I believe, is November 2nd, but you don't want to wait that long.
No.
If you want the absentee ballot, you need to get that done today.
I don't think we have as much problem here with voter suppression as some states do, but as you know, the Supreme Court yesterday in a 5-3 vote denied the extension of time to count the votes in Wisconsin. And by golly, that is not good news. You would, and I'm just of the opinion that we don't need to, make things harder for people to vote. Maybe the answer is to start earlier with counting, and also maybe vote on Sunday. I think there's some innovations that we could do, but I'm in favor of everybody voting that wants to vote.
And we should certainly make provisions that are sure that we count every vote of each person.
Especially if it's postmarked before the election, count it. But that's the
Absolutely.
ruling. That's the
I
ruling
did reach
yesterday.
out to the county commission and I asked them this question: if people are standing in line at 7:30 when the polls close, and let's say there's 10 people still in line,
right,
what happens to those 10? Well, they've told me yesterday that they allow those 10 people to vote.
Sure.
What they do is, I think, is they'll bring them inside the building or whatever, and they'll close the doors, but at that point, those folks are all going to get to vote. I think that same logic supports if somebody's turned in an absentee ballot, but let's say right now state law says they have to be counted by the time the polls close, actually counted. I asked the question, what are they going to do if they haven't counted all the absentee ballots by 7:30? Their indication is, John, that's why we have preliminary returns and final returns. We'll give the announcement of what we've got done by the time the polls close, but if we're short, we will keep counting. And I think there's logic to that.
Sure.
Because like you said, the stamp or the receipt, they have it in hand. It's like the person standing in line. There's no logic to deprive that vote of being counted.
Well, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it just seems to me that we ought to be looking for ways to make things easier for people to vote. And if that means voting on a Sunday, voting more than one day rather than have it the last day of voting, then we ought to do it. And certainly if a absentee ballot is postmarked before the election, in my judgment, it ought to be counted, and because otherwise the post office may be responsible for having the delay.
Right, and most of the time in legal obligations that you have with the court, a lot of times when you're obligated to do something by a certain date, very often it is driven by a date stamp. And that makes sense as well. And we know that things with the post office, it could vary across the country. And why should one person's vote count? It is like the IRS. Get that timestamp on that tax return when you file it, by that April 15th deadline. And if it counts for taxes, it ought to be able to count for voting.
Yeah, Jon, let's talk about your attitude. And I believe you would classify yourself as a fiscal conservative.
I really am. I will tell you this. There is no doubt about it. Our thoughts evolve over time. When I was in college, I thought to myself, when I would hear about different federal programs, I was really enthused by different federal funding programs. I have evolved. I'm 70 years old. I've evolved to the point where I really realize that very often a federal funding program really means this is another opportunity for the federal government to get in your life and the personal things that are important to you. And so I'm really, really skeptical of that. But fiscally conservative, absolutely. And I think what we're doing in Arkansas right now, it seems like everybody's focused on wanting to reduce that income tax. That's the fairest tax there is, actually, because it's based on how much income a person has. When I was at Walmart, let me assure you, I made great income, and I paid a lot of taxes. And I know it might be hard for people to believe this, but my wife and I did not complain about it. We were appreciative of the fact that we had the good income that could pay that additional rate. But sales taxes, that's what we know is the most regressive tax out there. It puts the biggest burden on people with limited incomes. So that's why I always want to suggest reforms. Like, for instance, you and I talked about it before, but when you go buy that used car and you had to work hard to save the down payment, you had to work hard to figure out how you're going to make the monthly payment, and then you get hit with that lump sum sales tax.
Yeah.
And we know who you are, we know your address, we've got the license to your car. Why can't we give that person a year or 2 or 3 to pay that out? There's no reason not to. Right. To me, that's an easy bipartisan legislative fix. It's one of the things that I would work for if I went to the legislature.
Yeah, and like you say, it's a lump sum payment. I bought a used car here sometime back, and I like $13,500, and boy, the sales tax was like $1,700, one fell swoop there, and a lot of people would appreciate a chance to pay that off maybe every month.
Exactly, and there's no reason not to. And like I say, we're going to get the money, so we're not going to have a tax loss. Same thing with I would like to see a situation where people 65 and older, at least at some threshold, don't have to pay property tax. And a person may say, or at least not at the time it's being assessed on an annual basis. It's kind of like the 50 or the 401k or the retirement account. We don't charge people income as they're accumulating their wealth. Why do we do it on people that are at the end of their earnings life cycle, and now their home is appreciating more than the single most important asset that they have, and we're going to hit them with additional real estate property tax? I say, why not defer that until they sell the property or until the family sells the property? We can still collect funds from that appreciation, but let's do it when it's being drawn down, just like we do normal retirement accounts.
John, I believe you've taken a position on some of these amendments, like Amendment 1, which is the permanent fix on half-cent sales tax on for the roads. You're opposed to that, I believe.
Absolutely. I really believe it's fraudulent for the legislature to not, when you read the title in the bill, when you go vote, if you haven't voted already, you will never see the word permanent. And yet the governor, the legislature, the Chamber of Commerce, everybody acknowledges that that's what this is. When you actually dig down into the actual language, they want the citizens to not only make it a permanent sales tax, which is, to me, is unbelievable to do, but secondly, they want to bake that into our Constitution. That's not what a Constitution is for. That's supposed to be setting high principles, high policies. But a tax rate and a sales tax, the most regressive tax in the world, and it also means we never get to second guess whether or not we want to change our minds on that budget, because as you know, issue number 3, which I also oppose and suggest people vote no on, is the one that's going to add
difficult. Yeah.
Exactly, it's going to make it much more difficult for citizens to pass citizens initiative. I actually think so difficult that we won't see them again, because if the proof is in the pudding, look at this ballot this year. There are 3 issues on the ballot that came from the legislature, because they're not held to any standard by our Supreme Court, which I think is wrong. But the 3 ballots that were citizen initiatives for this year, 4, 5, and 6, all of them have been kicked off by the court. Because why? Because they failed to comply with some technical, requirement that was already existing. Imagine how hard it's going to be for citizens to get in front of the people on a vote. And I'll tell you what, KURM listeners and Colonel, to me it's real obvious why the legislature's doing that. They didn't like the medical marijuana bill that the citizens passed, which, by the way, Benton County and House District 96 voted for. And they didn't like the minimum wage, which also, surprisingly, House District 96 voted for.
You know, in an effort to be transparent, Governor Hutchinson will appear on this show on Thursday morning, and I know he's appearing to tout this Amendment 1. So I just mentioned that he's traveling the state urging people to vote.
He definitely is. But the thing that I would say to folks, because some people have said to me, well, John, if you don't support issue 1, our individual cities and counties are going to be hit pretty hard because they stand to gain, millions of dollars to help them with their roads and highways. And I would say that's exactly right, which is why the legislature should look at a 1, 2, or 3 year tax if they need to raise the funds to help the cities and the counties and the state. But that doesn't mean that we close our eyes and put it into our Constitution as a permanent tax on the backs of folks. When we asked them to vote for this, and I did vote for it, I was in Arkansas at the time, and the big sales pitch then was, we promise this is a 10-year tax, this is a temporary tax, do it this one time and we'll work miracles with our highways and we won't come back to the trough. And yet here they are now and wanting to make it permanent, and yet the ballot statement on the ballot does not. You can read that and you would not know that that's getting ready to happen to you. You're only going to know if you pay attention to programs like this.
Now, I take it that you would also have been against the sales tax for the Taj Mahal type courthouse facility.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I voted against it. And by the way, my opponent supported it in multiple ways. He was a justice of the peace at Benton County. But that courthouse that was going to be built, oh, sure, it was nice. Who wouldn't like it? I mean, we'd all like to sleep in it. It was so nice, entertain guests in it. And that's kind of what people were thinking about, is they wanted something that they could show off as this wonderful place to have our courts building. But we didn't need anything near that fancy. And Benton County voted it down. House District 96 voted it down. And I voted no on it as well.
I certainly am with you on the reduction or elimination of property taxes for people over 65, at least for a reasonable priced home. If you've got a $1 million home, maybe
sure,
that's excessive, but up to a certain figure, people should be able to quit paying property taxes when they get to be 65 years old.
Yes, and to me it's not just because we want to give them a freebie, it's because we know that they're at the end of their life earnings wages cycle, let's say, but we also know that their own expenses keep going up around them. Their health care costs, their medication costs, all these things keep going up. We know they have to pay for more services at their home where maybe they used to be able to do them before. So these folks need a break. And the last thing they need in their retirement years is to be stressed thinking that their home is in jeopardy because they can't afford it. And then they get pressured into doing these reverse mortgages, which can just scare the life out of people and their families as they try to figure out, how do we keep paying these real estate taxes?
Yeah. Now, we've had some of the national figures advocate free college tuition, and you've got a little different twist on this. You say it should be, at least in-state tuition should be tax deductible.
Right. I mean, the one thing about tax
good.
policy is, two things that we do with taxes is, with tax policy, we generate money so that we can meet the needs of the state, and we help develop policy. We're setting policy. We're incentivizing conduct. That's why they do all these breaks for businesses that we try to lure and come to Arkansas. Well, you know what? We've got a brain drain in Arkansas. We have a lot of folks that get educated elsewhere. They're going to all these other colleges. And one of the things that would build more, we've got a decent rate of college tuition. It's still high, but it's still decent comparison to others. But one of the things that would just add that incentive is, let our parents have a tax break on the in-state tuition. And I guarantee you, when people do the math, their sons and daughters will understand the logic of saying, let's stay in Arkansas and get educated. And the likelihood is they'll stay here and work then for their careers following.
Well, it certainly would help economically, because that's a strain on a lot of people when they start sending their kids to college.
Yes.
Now, I'm intrigued by this idea that you have, that the state budget should be a red line item for fat reduction.
And what I really mean by that is, the governor has challenged folks to do that, but the truth of it is, if we went through the budget, which some folks attempt to do, there is no doubt that you're going to find excessiveness. And I would tell you, one of the big areas that I believe is ripe for review is our Department of Corrections budget, our prison system. And listen, through no fault of the people that run it now, you do the job that you're given, and that's what those folks are doing. But I would suggest to people that one of the things we do in this state, we tend to over-incarcerate. I think I told you, Colonel, that in 2015, Arkansas was at the number one in the nation at the rate of incarceration of our citizens. That to me was an incredible fact, to think that of every single state of the nation, we were incarcerating at a rate greater than any other state. That made no sense to me. At the time, we were revoking parole at a rate of 400%. The legislature hired national people to help them understand what is it we're doing. And of course, it was pretty obvious what we were doing. We were over-incarcerating. That's why one of the things I focus on is marijuana. I mean, I know I get into debates with folks, but I would say this. I would really recommend that we decriminalize marijuana. And I know some folks would say, John, but that's a bad drug in and of itself. I'm not saying just make it out there rampant, but if we decriminalize it, the amount of resources that we will save from the arrest side, from the prosecution, from the incarceration, it's in the hundreds of thousands of man hours that are spent by our law enforcement in our judicial system on marijuana offenses. I don't think that conduct warrants that kind of reaction today. I think when we live in a nation where even our own state has recognized medical marijuana, we're basically telling ourselves that marijuana is a substance that does have some beneficial effect, and yet what we say when we decriminalize it is we're saying it has none. And we want respect for the law. We all talk about the rule of law and respect for the rule of law. There's something that causes you and I to not respect the law when, on the one hand, we say it's legal as a medicinal substance, but on the other hand, we keep burdening our sons and daughters and uncles and aunts and mothers and fathers with felonies. Because why? Because they smoke some marijuana. I don't smoke marijuana. I choose not to. Yeah. But I don't want to criminalize the people that do, and I think it's a big waste of our resources. But here's the big catch. I think I told you in Oklahoma, where they have a much greater medicinal marijuana program than we do in Arkansas. For the preceding year, there was a report issued in September of 20, just this past September. They exceeded tax revenues of over $80 million. This is, I mean, I hate to be blunt, but marijuana, just like other products, this is a tax base that this state of Arkansas can benefit from, and we should. And what does Oklahoma do with that money? Some of that money they earmark it for drug recovery and treatment, yeah, and things of that, and we should do the same thing.
Yeah, treatment, it seems to me, maybe instead of incarcerating so many people on drug offenses, that we need to maybe step up our treatment plan.
We really do. I mean, if right here in Northwest Arkansas, we're the most, what would you say, well-off portion of the state, yeah, of Arkansas, and yet, Colonel and listeners, I would tell you that if you know a friend, or if you know of a friend who has a drug dependency issue, they find it hard if they need inpatient services. It's very hard, even in our area, to find a free bed. Sometimes they'll tell people that are in jail, hey, we can get you into a program 3 months from now or 6 months from now. But that doesn't work, because if that person gets out and they're in a drug addiction low point of their life, they don't have 3 months or 6 months to get into recovery. And one thing I'd like to mention, Colonel, is it's our whole attitude about drug use and drug possession and how we send so many people to prison because at the end of the day, they have substance abuse addiction issues. I saw that when I was a circuit court judge for Benton County. You know, we talk about possession and dealers, but most of the time in our state, yes, there are some big time money dealers, but most of those folks end up in federal court. In our state court, we're seeing people do minimal monetary transactions because they're actually serving their own habit. Okay, do we want to continue calling those people criminals, or do we want to call them patients and get them medical care?
I got you. John, we're out of time this morning, and I know that you certainly solicit people's support, and you want their vote. We urge everybody to vote, make a special effort to get out and vote early, or be sure to vote on November 3rd. But if you're elected, you pledge that you're going to be the hardest working representative they've ever had.
I mean, you know what? And I appreciate you saying that because that is my comment to people. I want them to know that I'm the best representative they've ever had. And that means they'll know me at the end of 2 years, and they'll actually say, I reached out to him, he responded to my call, he responded to my email, and he followed up and helped me negotiate with our state government. That's what I want to do primarily.
So get out and vote, folks, and vote for Jon Comstock, who is the Democratic candidate for House District 96. The proceeding has been a paid political conversation.